In the fast-paced world of business, finding a clear path to profitability can be a challenge. Welcome to 0 to 100 with your host, Jared Guy Randolph, seasoned business and finance expert. Tune in for actionable insights and strategies to accelerate your business success.
Hello, Accelerators. Today on 0 to 100, I am proud to introduce our guest, Steve Vettorel. He is the co-founder of First Down Financial, a registered investment advisor and an award-winning financial advisor. And we're going to talk about some really key topics, which he calls the 5 pillars of asset protection. Everything from lawsuits to IRS to the stock market and how to hedge against it, long-term care, and most importantly, estate planning. What happens to your estate? We're going to talk about it. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jared Guy Randolph. I am the founder of BoxFi. We are the nation's leading payment consultant, providing business growth solutions through payment processing. And I'm very excited to share the network I have built over my 25-year entrepreneurial career to help you grow your business and become more profitable. Ladies and gentlemen, let's accelerate together. I'm very happy to have Steve, the man, the myth, the legend, Vettorel, if you're Italian, or Vettorel, if you're not Italian. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Jared.
Awesome. So as a financial advisor and a fiduciary, we're going to have a really interesting call that's going to add a ton of value to our audience of business owners and entrepreneurs. And the first thing that I want to start with, which is a huge pillar, pun intended, of your business, is your 5 pillars of asset protection. Let's talk first about asset protection before we go anywhere else in this conversation.
So probably the biggest question I get, and for everybody in the audience, I would highly encourage you to reach out to me, because the longer version of this presentation, which is about an hour long, will absolutely do you justice in this. We're going to touch a lot about a lot of these topics very basically, but I really think the deeper dive is going to be a huge value to the audience, especially if you're considering starting a business, a current business owner, a physician, some sort of practicing whatever, and so forth. But a lot of people will ask me, why estate planning, Steve? Why does it matter? I mean, really the answer is it just depends on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to an attorney, asset protection means something completely different than if you're talking to somebody like myself as a fiduciary, as a Series 65 financial advisor. Attorneys will tell you, well, you need to have trusts in place, protect your assets from liability insurance and all that. And that's very important. We'll talk about that today. But really the bottom line of asset protection is there are 5 distinct components or pillars to it. And the importance of each of these components is almost paramount. A lot of them dovetail into each other in how they're structured. Right. One thing I try to offer my clients is unbiased advice, is that I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney, right? Everything we talk about today, past performance is no indication of the future, and all the disclaimer stuff, seek advice from your own counsel. But one beautiful thing I think our clients love about us is that even though we don't practice law, we're not CPAs, we can tell our clients things because we come from 25 years of experience in this arena. So we can shed the light upon different areas that maybe your other advisors wouldn't tell you. And it's almost exclusively related to, obviously, tax savings, long-term care, as we'll go through today, the IRS, and how, we have a big change in tax law coming up at 25. We have the mother of all fights because most of these tax law provisions are sunsetting. So certainly the areas of asset allocation and the investments in the market as a whole, and real estate, and obviously the client's business. But the asset protection component I could talk for hours on this, but just in terms of keeping a really just very shallow discussion, I would encourage everybody at the end to please listen to this presentation in its entirety. The individual I work with heavily on not only this book, but the presentation as a whole, is the only other advisor I've ever come across in this entire country that thinks exactly like I do. And I've been in beta tests to help him develop his assessment software to analyze risk, which is essentially everything.
So within that software, do you have the 5 pillars already built out in that software? Go walk me through the 5 pillars.
So the five pillars, pillar number one, and I can always refer to the sheets, and we have an extensive PowerPoint that goes with this. We really kind of try and send out to everybody if they want it. But the first pillar is lawsuit protection. And the bottom line of that is it's just negligence, right? Car accidents. Surprisingly enough, you're going to do yourself wonders in negligence if you just don't text and drive. I mean, driving is 6 times in texting more dangerous than drunk driving. Most people don't know that. Wow. Before I got into this a few years ago, I didn't even understand. The next thing is premises liability. So this is slips and falls, handrails, parties on your property, so forth. This is negligence related to that, and that you can be personally liable for those events, right?
Wow.
Looking at professionals, right? Lawyers, doctors, CPAs, insurance agents, architects, the professional negligence. It's a big deal in this country. And we work with a lot of physicians in our practice here in Central Florida that are cardiologists. And they obviously have significant potential negligence, and they must have malpractice insurance. But just taking the steps to protect themselves and their practice, regardless of what the practice may be,
Right.
is of utmost importance. Like, a lot of people don't know this, for instance, lawsuit protection. I can't tell how many people I come across as clients, they own property outside of their primary residence, right?
Right.
A lot of us do.
Right.
And they don't have the property in a trust. They don't have the property in an LLC. I mean, it's just in the name, in many cases, of themselves and their spouse. And that to me just blows my mind, because God forbid somebody gets in, some sort of situation, any kind of negligence. I always use the example, somebody getting injured at a party, or God forbid, losing their life on your property. They're going to come after you full bore.
So you're saying that your personal, I want to make sure that we're very clear. So let's say you're a business owner and you own a restaurant, and you own multiple restaurants, you own all of your physical locations. If someone were to fall and slip and get hurt, and your insurance doesn't cover enough of that particular situation, that individual who got hurt on your property could sue you and go after your personal real estate?
Depending on how the restaurant's structured, yes. There are a lot of forensic attorneys that play in this sandbox, so to speak. And we're fortunate enough to have a few of them as clients. This goes, but it is scary what these guys can find with modern big data. I mean, they basically, if they do enough digging with just normal legal systems of data access we all can have, like a catch light or something like that, they know, they could tell if you're wealthy or not. And if they could tell if you're wealthy, and certainly the properties and so forth, so a good asset protection specialist, a financial advisor, will recommend layers of protection in the business or the property or your apartment complex to protect yourself. And it doesn't necessarily mean just, let's just put it in an LLC and it's away from, there's different types of structures that need to be set up, where even a family limited partnership can own some of these assets outside of an LLC. Again, this is where I have a tendency to go too deep, but just for purposes of the discussion, there are multiple ways, and you really want to find, in my opinion, an unbiased advisor to present all of the different options to you, and the pros and cons.
So let's do this, because it's really important what you're talking about. And you and I have had this conversation before, and I do have the book. It is number 3 on my list of books I'm going to read. I got to get through 2 others first, but I am very excited to read it because I want to learn more. Just run down the 5. So our audience has the 5 key pillars that they need to be looking out for.
Yep. So 5 pillars, essentially helping you identify risks that essentially, if unaccounted for, can ruin you financially. So identifying, obviously, the risks important, but what's equally important is identifying the potential solutions to protect against them.
Okay.
So pros and cons, so to speak. So I already talked about lawsuit protection, obviously. Pillar 2 is the IRS, so which essentially is your number one guaranteed creditor. And obviously, if many in this country disagree that taxes are going to be going up while we're close to $35 trillion in debt, I would disagree. Taking steps to eliminate income, capital gains, and estate tax. And with a couple of the experts we work with, which are tops in the industry in respect, there are ways to mitigate risk and on property appreciation as well as tax, which is surprising. I'm not talking about a 1031 exchange. Pillar 3, stock market, which we'll spend a little bit more time on in this presentation, but Essentially, it's the byproduct of unchecked investment risk, essentially losing a significant portion of your investable assets. The next stock market crash, you're basically taking steps to hedge the downside, which is what we specialize in, and asset protection. Pillar 4 is long-term care. Here's a shocker. 69% of people age 65 and older will need some form of LTC. So these costs can easily exceed $100K a year a person. Must be planned for. The more expensive the state, New York, right, California, the more costly the care is. But there are ways to mitigate those costs, and you don't necessarily have to go out and buy an expensive long-term care policy.
I definitely want to make sure that we cover that before. But
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go to 5. We're going to talk about that.
Here to keep in mind, everybody in this audience, this is a new presentation for us. So,
you're all good.
Yeah, I know. Remember when Tiger Woods redid his fantastic swing? Everybody's like, "Why did you redo your swing? You're man,
Got to get better, man. Got to get better."
Our presentations here. So, pillar 5 is estate planning. So most estate plans are not set up correctly, or they're incomplete. The other shocker, and we work with a lot of attorneys closely here. Most people that set up a trust, they don't fund it. That's like 70%. It's nuts.
Wow.
So essentially it's wasted time, significant expense. And then most importantly, you want to avoid probate. I mean, that's one of the biggest takeaways in the estate planning component. I want everybody to clearly understand probate is public and it is costly. So, and also taking steps with both legal, medical, and financial directives so that unnecessarily cause you estate taxes.
Got you. So you actually made a comment, which I think is super interesting, is that the IRS is your first and biggest creditor. Can we talk about some of the strategies that the ultra high net worth use or implement to either avoid or reduce paying their taxes, but they stay compliant with law or tax code?
Yeah, so really the key thing is that the IRS, and this is probably one of the few non-arguable things we'll talk about for here, is they're the number one guaranteed creditor. So, and that's every single year. So capital gains taxes, estate taxes, obviously taxes on regular income. But essentially when we're helping clients save money on both current and future taxes, we're doing a form of estate and asset protection. And it just boils down to helping, especially business owners, contribute to retirement plans, save taxes using those contributions through a myriad of different types of retirement plans. And that's a whole other hour's presentation. But just know the real ways to mitigate or reduce taxes out of it. There's also a very advanced topics we can go into.
So what would you say are 2 strategies that you implement for some of your high net worth clients to reduce those taxes? Like, what are 2 things you would do today for somebody who's starting to prepare for their taxes in 2025?
So number 1 would be the Roth conversion. Still viable. It's still just a fantastic way to remove assets from a forced distribution arena, right? Again, more risk right there, right? Your risk is you're paying money, you're being forced to take assets out of the IRA. And this is typically for a client that has, at least for that portion of their wealth, a legacy goal, right? They don't necessarily want it. They want to pass it on to charity or their children or whatever. But the strategy of a Roth conversion is the single most powerful. A lot really don't realize is that, yes, it is converting in his regular income, but if it's done in a structured, tiered process over a period of time, not only are we helping remove that from your estate, because a Roth IRA is never taxed in gains or growth ever, nor are you ever forced to take money out of it. But more importantly, we can actually show you ways to mitigate the income that's needed when you convert to a Roth IRA. So a lot of people are like, well, I want to convert 100 grand a year, whatever the number is, or 300 grand, or if it's $1 million IRA, they may want to convert the whole thing in a 5-year tiered structure.
Right.
But I don't want to pay the tax. There's actually ways that you could be bonused on what you invest in that will help pay for some of those taxes.
Wow.
So it's sort of like a Rob and Peter to pay Paul. But in the end, you're converting that asset to a Roth. That is strategy powerful, number 1. Number 2, if you're a business owner, is ways to mitigate taxes due on revenue that the business has, depending on the business, and also protect the business. A lot of people don't realize there's insurance that you can purchase that will protect components of your business against literally 50 different types of loss. One of them being COVID revenue. So a lot of people didn't know there was an actual policy you could have purchased for the business. It's kind of like key person type insurance for, using indexed universal life, more advanced type of life strategies that would actually protect the business from everything from lawsuits, from bad PR, which is a real relevant thing here in terms of risk these days, from lawsuits and going through all the different areas. But that's number two. And then obviously the problem, at least we see, is most clients don't get the correct advice from their CPAs. And it's not the CPAs are, many of them are just exceptional at what they do, but they ride in a very tight lane.
Right.
And they don't really want to like go outside the lane. They just want to crunch the numbers and do the best for it, but they don't really do a lot of advanced tax planning. So we use individuals like Rocky, who wrote the book. We use individuals like Ed Slott as experts to help us guide the client in other areas of tax efficiency related to income and asset.
So there's something that I want to lean into, which you said is business revenue protection. All of our audience are running businesses that have revenue, and they hope that part of that revenue is profit. Otherwise, they would be doing what they do because it's passionful and purposeful. But talk to me about how much something like business revenue protection would cost a business owner that's doing $5 to $10 million in revenue on an annual basis.
A lot of that is the really deep discussion. It's going to take a lot longer than what we have time for.
Give us the snapshot of like, this is what a potential range could be. Because the good thing is to be able to be aware of it and wrap your head around it going into the conversation, less about the intricacies, but it's like, hey, it's going to cost you $5,000 a year, but XYZ will be protected if you have something like this in place.
Well, I mean, the business as a whole would be protected, but the answer to that question is probably about 14 or 15 variables of it depends. You very easily could spend, I always use the example of somebody owns $400,000 in NVIDIA stock, and maybe they put 40 G's into it. They've held it for a long time. So they have just a monster capital gain, right? And that's why they don't want to sell it. There's a strategy out there that will allow us to collar that position, essentially owning the options market, puts and calls to protect that underlying stock position, which is highly appreciated. But at the same time, you don't have to sell it. So if NVIDIA gets crushed, the options go way to the moon, even though the stock's gone down, you don't have no tax to sell. It's like insuring a $100,000 car. Yes, the insurance may cost you $2,000 a year on it, but if the car evaporates in an accident, right, the insurance is there to cover the car. It's the same type of concept.
Gotcha.
Maybe I've explained it a little toward generically related to an automobile or a stock position, but you can do the same thing for a business. Not for revenue loss, just because you're not aggressive in the marketplace or what have you, or competitive, but it's loss due to an outside exogenistic event, COVID, lawsuits, somebody that's trying to poison pill your business, whether maybe it's an aggressive acquirer, right? Almost like a hostile acquisition.
Gotcha.
There's insurance to protect against stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But the surprising thing to most of the business owners we meet with, there are all kinds of other strategies that even though the business makes a lot of money, 5, 10 million a year, we come across a lot of these clients, there are ways to cut those taxes down to the IRS a lot, 20, maybe 30% off of that, and protect the business at the same time.
Wow. That's awesome. So,
and again, it depends, right? There's a myriad of factors and variables that go into that, because a lot of people listen to this and be like, oh, right, I got all these strategies. It totally depends on the business. So,
well, what's unique about the position that you're in is you actually have the answers for it depends, which is really great for our audience. But there's something else that you mentioned earlier, which I think is really important. We all understand this. We just don't know what to do. The stock market truly is unpredictable. And if there's ways in which the audience could hedge against the market, explain to us what to do so we can protect ourselves.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory, if I may. We'll spend just a bit more time on this section. So I would encourage everybody listening to this, if you've learned nothing else, please leave this conversation with this understanding. There is a large amount of financial advisors in this country, and I would encourage everybody on this call, if you do ever have or decide to engage the services of an advisor, we'd be happy to talk to you as well. please make sure you go through a rigorous investigation of these individuals, checking their background, going through everything that they've done, and can they demonstrate it? Most importantly, do they have downside protection? Now, we're going to show slides 34 through 36 in this particular one, but for the purposes of the discussion, the one of the 5 pillars is really just protection. So if you're looking at the screen and you're old enough to have been around since you've been in the stock market, the chart shows the big declines in both 2000 and the 2007 crash.
Right.
So you can see the circled numbers there of minus 50%. That's actually a monthly value number. The daily number is essentially minus 55 at its worst. But so when the market crashed in 07, people ask, well, is the stock market a creditor? And I said, the answer is absolutely. It's a creditor, and it's your goal as an advisor or as an individual managing their own wealth to figure out ways to mitigate the risk. So you hedge that risk to make sure that when there's large drawdowns in the marketplace, you're secure and your assets and the risk associated with them are mitigated.
Right.
Potentially even eliminated in some cases. So a lot of people are like, well, there's always risk to the stock market. Yes, there is. But depending on who you use as a planner, you may hear, well, don't worry, I'm going to take care of your assets. I'm going to put you in a proper mix of stocks and bonds. And then you'll see in some cases, like in the next slide, and they may show you an asset allocated model, a 60-40, and talk about market profile or talk about any kind of modern portfolio theory. How did that help you during the 2000 and 2007 corrections? The portfolio still got clobbered. And they're like, well, you were diversified. You had your assets allocated correctly among different areas. The problem with that is if you're in retirement and your portfolio takes a 30% hit, you're actually drawing income out of it. That's a problem. You have a chance of running out of money depending on the size of the portfolio, obviously. That doesn't strike me as risk mitigation, right? I don't want my assets going backwards.
Right.
So if you have a 30% loss in any particular, and then that's a dramatic effect. Obviously, the recovery is not 30%. When you're down 30% in the market, you have to get a 43% return just to get back to even. So it's really, really important that these large drawdowns in the stock market, especially in retirement years, when you maybe have higher chances of needing to draw income from the portfolio, are less. So you get really essentially avoiding it. The other thing that people probably will never tell you in any investment meeting, did you know that if you have a number of accounts, and let's say you have 3 accounts and one of them is down and the other 2, maybe they're flat or they're up, you don't ever draw the money from the account that's down. You always draw it from the ones that are either flat or going up in a given year. I mean, it seems intuitive, right? But in reality, a lot of people are like, well, this account's bad. I'll just take that. I never want to draw money from an account that's down. You have a significantly higher chance, especially if you have 30, 40 years, in some cases longer, of longevity in retirement when there's drawing income from those assets. It is absolutely critical to gauge the appetite.
Here's a question, because I want to stay on this right now. You just said something important in terms of flat or down for the accounts. Is there any point in time where you believe that you should just cut bait and run with whatever that stock might be and then reinvest in something else? Like, what will you advise when the market really is just not doing well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so out in the asset allocation, it is imperative, and there's very few of us like myself and Rocky and probably a host of others. We represent about maybe 5% of the financial advisors in the market that actually have a long-short strategy for clients. And we actually implement it. I mean, it's not a lot of trading, but it's such trying to sidestep big downs in the market. In some cases, maybe short if it's a real protracted down, right?
Yep.
The difference is what you'll hear and what a lot of people listening to this podcast will say, well, you can't time the markets. Well, I mean, arguably the 7 or 8 billionaires on the Forbes list, they're hedge fund guys that weren't or I should say they didn't inherit it. They would beg to differ, right? So you kind of can time the markets if you know what you're doing. The difference is you'll never catch the top and you'll never catch the bottom. The most important thing is cutting a swath out of the decline or being on the right side of a lift back out of any kind of bearish period of time. That's where the sort of cut your teeth in portfolio management is earned, in my opinion. So these are the kind of questions you want to have with your advisor. He or she should be able to accurately demonstrate through an entire full market cycle where they would have done for their clients And can they demonstrate it? And compared to this conversation, some of the slides are, I hope you listen to the whole presentation, which we can hook you up with, but that is where it's absolutely going to shake the men and the girls from the boys and the ladies, so to speak, in investing, right? They're going to shake themselves out of the weeds because they can't have a discussion surrounding that. What happens when the market goes down a lot? The answer is you don't want to be in it, right? So have a long, short strategy that can mitigate or to participate. There's also very surprising maybe to a lot of clients, we're constantly shocked that many of the advisors they deal with, they don't present to them some of the risk-free strategies. There's about 6 of them out there that have absolutely no risk to them. So you can make money along with the growth of the market, but there's no downside risk. One of them's fixed indexed annuities, which seems like a bad word to some advisors. I find it nutty and that you wouldn't at least show clients because you're bringing a brand new asset class into their allocation across their different.
So Steve, why wouldn't they show them an option like that?
Well, I mean, if you look at my bio, I used to work for Ken Fisher, and he's one of the biggest proponents against annuities. And there's all kinds of material out there that debunks every component he says that's negative. But in the past, pre-2004, if you will, many annuities had fees and they had very little growth. So the argument is, well, they have high fees with no growth, their money's locked up for a period of time. Not the case anymore. So many of them have no fees. A lot of them have as much growth as of the market, and there's no downside risk. So you don't put all your money in any one given investment, right? But why would it not be a piece of your overall pie of your investment allocation? It's amazing. Rocky goes into in the full presentation of this, including the On Point Software Rules show, goes into, there's almost 17 pages in that book. You guys got to put that book up on the.
Oh, yeah. By the way, what we link at the end, we'll definitely link your book because not everybody's going to be watching this on YouTube or as video. They're going to be listening to it. We're going to link the book, which I'm excited to read. We're also going to link to the presentation because it really is a value add for people to listen to that. But that was my segue. Go back to Steve.
Just call me, not Rocky. Some crap. And my podcasts have gone further than his. He actually does not. The funny thing is he runs a firm very similar to us here at First Down. So
gotcha.
They contract out with different agents and advisors around the country as we do. But we keep that group very small and very specific. But to answer your question, you can invest and, look, past performance is no indication of the future. But the last few years, many of the carriers that we've connected clients with for a fixed indexed annuity allocation, they've had over 14% returns. And there's no risk.
And maybe this is a nascent question, Steve. How is there no risk associated with that? And you're still getting a 14%?
Because the insurance company contractually guarantees the annuity. So if you're investing with a North American or an Athene or an Allianz, some of the big A+ carriers out there, we deal with probably 100 of them. We're a nationwide firm. But the key really is that unlike a bank, an insurance company must reserve $1. So if you put $1 into an insurance company, by law, they must reserve $1. If you put $1 into JP Morgan as a bank,
wow,
they're one of the more conservative, well-run in this country. Jamie Dimon, we love him, right? Chase can loan out up to $12 to $17 on that $1. Bear Stearns loaned out 20 to 30, and that's why they blew up right during the financial crisis, or Lehman Brothers. So that leverage in banking is much different than the insurance companies. They cannot. So if you were to Google bankruptcy insurance companies, the last 50 years, the list is small, and it has nothing to do with how the portfolio is run or invested. In many cases, it was a failed merger on one of them and some malfeasance a long, long time ago by another one. But there's just like, how many banks, 17 or 18,000 banks went poof in 2008? There was only 4 insurance companies that went down.
So I want to make sure that
because of a merger.
I want to make sure I'm hearing this clearly. An insurance company, if they take in $1 of an investment, they're required to have $1 on reserves.
It's called the reserve requirement.
Wow. That's actually huge, man.
Well, Warren Buffett has how much of Berkshire Hathaway's in insurance companies? There's a bananas amount of his wealth.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he owns 2 of these insurance companies. I get it. But he has lots of investments in the North Americans of the world and the Allianzes and some of the bigger names out there. There's 7 or 8 in this country that are very, very well respected. They have very high ratings. We typically only work with A-rated carriers to A+, but the performance of these products recently has been stellar. But here's the thing. If the stock market is down 20% in a given year, you lose 0 in your fixed index annuity. You also don't make anything that year either, but you're protecting the asset, right?
Wow. That's a major hedge. That is a major hedge. So
outside of that, since you don't put all your money in annuities, but outside of that, the stock and bond portfolios that we allocate for clients or whatever advisor they seek out, make sure that they have a long, short risk mitigation strategy for those components of the portfolio. We use Charles Schwab to custody in our case, but regardless of the brokerage firm or whoever, just make sure these advisors can demonstrate to you accurately, and many of them won't be able to, and this is where you're going to trip them up. So we have a really popular piece that gets downloaded from our website a lot. It's called the 17 questions to ask your financial advisor.
Awesome.
And the funny thing is I tell every client, turn every one of those questions right around and start asking us too.
Right. That's the point of it. So as we're getting a taste of your expertise, and it's deep, and I know that you can definitely go even more in depth, which also is awesome because your knowledge base is very deep. I want to touch on something that is very important that a business owner, which are our audience, a business owner, an entrepreneur, really needs to think long and hard about in their professional and personal lives. They work so hard, and whether they're looking for an exit, they want a family member to take over, they want to multiply or scale the business. It's once you get to a certain age in your life, making sure that your needs are met after you've served your business for so many years. Talk to me about long-term care and how to properly put that in place. And frankly, when you should be putting that in place.
Yeah. So the most important thing that probably is, and this is just a slide we show a lot in all of our presentations. We're actually doing one in Central Florida in front of a large equestrian society in the middle of the state here this week. But for many long-term care expenses, and this is directly off the slide, but for many long-term care expenses, be one of their largest expenses in retirement, obviously. On average, 69% of people ages 65 or older will need some form of LTC. Average daily cost of private nursing home today is $275 a day, or $108,000 annual. And this is off a Genworth study, so I have all the notes.
And I'll give you something anecdotally. I personally had a very dear friend who I loved and was so happy she was in my life for many years, pass away in her 70s. And towards the end of her life, we were paying for care, and it was $16,000 a month for care. It was literally $4,000 a month, a week for care, for full home care.
And God forbid, we always say a prayer for some of our aging clients here, but it's important that if there is any kind of Alzheimer's or dementia, those numbers go up exponential from what I just quoted.
Is there like an age where you should start looking at long-term care so you get ahead of it?
So just keep in mind that with the average daily cost of like an assisted living care, it's about $54,000 a year. So when helping clients protect against LTC costs, we do a form of asset protection utilizing life insurance. So it's much easier. And obviously this is something to do. Just people say, well, how to better prepare for this? The answer is get yourself a quality policy, not a long-term care policy, but get yourself a quality life insurance policy. The earlier, the better, right? Because you can qualify obviously and pass all the medicals.
Right.
But get that earlier in life versus waiting till you're 70 and trying to get a standard rating on a policy. But that's one of my biggest piece of advice is, and the business can pay for the policy as a benefit to the ownership. Getting into any of how that works, but there are ways that you can deduct, obviously, those expenses that will pay for that protection. It's kind of like a key man insurance type of situation.
Right.
But the answer to the question, most people don't know this, is that a traditional LTC insurance is very expensive. It's difficult to get underwritten. Obviously, if you wait till you're older, premiums can be increased in future years. But today, there's what's called an ABLTC life insurance policy is a lot more viable. So essentially, it's designed to pay a portion of the death benefit before death. In some cases, it could pay it out within a 3 to 6 year term, depending on the policy. but the underwriting is relaxed. It's just a phone interview. So unlike traditional LTC policies, in an AB LTC policy, they can have the following attributes. So you can have a return of premium rider, such if you need the cash, it's there. It has a sizable death benefit if it's not used.
Okay.
One even comes with an unlimited death benefit, which is essentially that 3 to 5 and 6 year term. Because with long-term care insurance itself will cost you about $4 to $9 grand a month if you're older right now. It's pointless. And obviously, with us, and maybe it's just our clientele, our average client's 7 figures. So many of them, they can be self-funded, God forbid, if they have to go into a facility. But many of them that followed our strategies early on, they now have policies that will help pay for it. And it's not costing them $4 to $9 grand.
But I will say this, just because of my experience, even if it was $4 or $5 grand a month, which is $1,000 to $1,250 a week, it's far cheaper than double, triple, or quadruple that, which you can easily, if you want long-term care in home. If you're going into an assisted living facility, I think that's a very different story. But this is just something that people need to key into because it's important, and the healthcare benefits that we have just aren't great. And who knows if Medicaid and Medicare are still going to be around in 20 or 30 years from now. So I'm in my 40s now. I'm starting to look at and think about things like this, compounding on things like also disability insurance as a business owner. What if something happens? I can't show up to work. I can't do what my team needs me to do. The business isn't going to thrive. It's not going to grow, and we're all screwed. So it's really important that you have these things in place. And we've covered the lawsuit protection, your IRS is your creditor. We talked about the stock market. We talked about long-term care. There's something that's really important that we should talk about that kind of encompasses all of that. And it's your fifth pillar is the estate planning. Walk me through, if I'm a business owner, I walk through your door and I say, Steve, we're doing $10 million annually in revenue. I'm earning 20% of that. So I'm bringing home $2 million. And I'm in my mid-40s, married, couple kids. What should I be looking at in terms of estate planning that are like the 3 key things that I need to do right away if I've done absolutely no estate planning?
Thing I would say is take a long, hard look at every asset you own. What is its value? And by the way, if you're looking to, we have a really cool free service where they'll give you a rough business evaluation, but based on some really good software. So if you want to evaluate a business, you can get in touch with me.
Cool.
It's just done through a particular piece of very specific software through one of our life carriers, Jared. So it's a really cool free service we offer. It's not going to go into a detailed business evaluation, but it'll put a number on the business generally based on a whole myriad of factors in the data. But get a valuation of the business, obviously all the valuation of all the assets, what they're titled in. And then everything, if you've listened to anything we're talking, we're going through the deeper presentation, you'll begin to be able, the lights will start to go on. Okay, well, the apartment complex is in my wife's name or mine and my partner's name. That's the same partners that own the HVAC company, right? There's a flag right there, right? So get in touch with us to get some good advice on that. But really it boils down to past the inventorying, the estate planning component is the 5th pillar, but I think it is just as important as the other 4. Because the key is to get those assets in the right title or the right ownership based on whatever wills, trust, durable powers. And a lot of this can be knocked out. It doesn't have to be expensive, by the way. There's a couple of attorneys we deal with that run online where you can get more of a generic plan put together, but have something at the very least. Whereas the advanced planning, using spousal lifetime access trusts or a dynasty trust, which is the big one I talked to you about, Jared, that will allow you to 1031 the property in what's called a dynasty or a Delaware statutory trust. That's a lot deeper of a discussion, but it's protecting the wealth that you've grown.
Gotcha.
Or a key man policy. As another big thing is if you've got 2 partners that run a construction company, equal weights of greatness in what they do, and God forbid one's not with them, what are they going to do we just had a case like this in Miami of a large concrete construction company. One of the brothers was killed in a car crash.
Oh, no.
And the huge key man policy they bought paid off the wife and had money to recruit in another expert to fill what I find is really, you can't fill this guy's shoes. He was that good at what he did. He built a lot of the high-rise condos in Miami.
Wow.
But essentially it took the place of the one partner, it took the place of the missing partner, and the family didn't have to force the other partner to sell the business and turns into a big mess. So that is probably one of the more powerful stories I have in estate planning, but it's also asset protection as well, right?
So let's take the concepts that we talked about. We talked about these as the 5 pillars of asset protection, which asset protection is all about mitigation of risk. So how do you, as an advisor, and you're working with a client, balance that risk mitigation, but still have a really great growth strategy for them in place as well?
That's where the proof's in the pudding, right? So I use a lot of F1 references because I'm a big F1 race fan. You got the track, right? You got your team, you got all the computer system, you got the cars, the engines, the drivers, you got all the experts in the pit crew, and it takes sort of like a whole plan to put it together.
Right.
You may have the greatest team on the track, but if you haven't tested out certain components of the risk related, you may wind up crashing in turn one, right?
Very true.
The key is really putting the right amount of percentages into all of these, not saying having an even spread, because everything's different for every client. Even though we got 365 clients at the firm and we oversee over 400 million of their wealth, there are many of those clients that have such a specific situation. They have their own portfolio, right? But all we can do as advisors is to present quality options, introduce our clients to some of our top partners in the fields in this area, and let them make the choice. And us is sort of help them guide the ship. But the most important thing is take action. Because if you've learned nothing from all these stats, there's so many people out there. There's an overwhelming percentage of business owners out there have no planning at all, like zero.
Yep.
But they put a ton of time into the business, and hey, God love you. You've done a great job. Love the capitalism and all that goes along. I think it's fantastic. I would challenge y'all to take it to the next step and bring some planning into your next phase.
Awesome. Now, Steve, before we go into our fun rapid fire question section, which Steve doesn't know these questions, so they're going to be new to him. Tell me a little bit quickly about how you guys are incorporating AI into your business.
In our particular case, it's really saving me time. So we use WealthBox as our CRM. It's one of the preeminent ones for financial advisory firms.
Cool.
WealthBox has a integration called Jump AI. You can Google it. It's pretty slick. Jump AI actually takes a note taker in Zoom or in Microsoft Teams, whatever your particular thing is. But this thing is so good. It could take an entire 2-hour Zoom. And I've had some 2-hour Zooms with clients before. Summarize the whole thing, email the notes to the client, and put all the notes from a compliance perspective, FINRA, SEC inside of. That has saved me a bunch of time because as advisors, we're meeting with clients, we're putting plans together. I'm portfolio manager for the firm. So it saves me a lot of time in meetings. The other thing is that inside of Charles Schwab, we have a system called iRebow, which uses AI to go through and know all of the different clients that own NVIDIA or Procter & Gamble or whatever the stock or position is. And I, with the click of a button, can set particular parameters of a sale related to that position within almost a 0.5 percentage point degree across all accounts. So if I'm like, NVIDIA hits, make up the number 200, we're gunning for it. Actually, if it hits 200, I want a 50% reduction in these 3 accounts. iRebow, go into the AI, it'll execute.
I love to hear that you're using AI because it's really important to everyone's business. We use it and it is changing the game for everyone. So, Steve, we're going to go into the rapid fire section. You ready?
Let's do it.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
If there were a zombie apocalypse and you had to leave the house, protect your family, what is the weapon of choice you're taking with you?
A Daniels Defense MM4V7 AR.
You know what? I say yes. I don't know what the heck that is, but why not?
The Daniels wins all the contracts with the special forces. We have 2 of their big dogs in Washington as clients.
You got
this weapon about 4 years ago. It's the bomb.
I'm going to come hang with you if there's a zombie apocalypse.
No, seriously, this thing's like the BMW M5 of ARs.
That's awesome. So is there any book that you would recommend our audience of entrepreneurs and business owners read? It's a mandatory. What would you suggest?
So typically business owners want to read self-help books on how to be a better person. I'm a James Clear fan. Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Period.
So one of my favorite books, I did that on my Sunday book review a couple months ago, and I recently had another guest who said the same thing. That really was a game-changing book because it helps you get focused, and it's those little tiny habits that add up at the end of the day, and that's a really good suggestion. So here's my next question for you. What is the number one thing in your industry that you disagree with?
Just a fixed asset allocation, just like that 60-40. We'll obviously have the slides up for everybody to see, but it really is just please do not keep a static asset allocation. Regardless of whoever your advisor is, they may be your best friend's goldfish's brother, and I get it. You got the family connection, but please make sure they're dynamic with your asset allocation through all full market cycles.
If you're a business owner, you're doing $10 million in revenue on an annual basis, and I walk through the door and I hand you a $300,000 check, how would you advise them to invest that $300,000 to double their profits over the next 12 months?
Depending upon who they want to run the money, there are a number of strategies. I'm not necessarily about doubling because the IRS and the SEC and Federal will be chasing me down the street because I'm guaranteeing performance, right? But past performance is no indication of the future. But the key really is what's the time frame for the money, right? What's your expectations for growth? And if those are solid expectations, many of them, somebody that comes in with that type of stipulation, they don't really have reasonable expectations, right? So I got to have a conversation with them, sort of bring them back down to earth, if you will. But realistically, if the market was to, probably going to see a pretty big correction next year, regardless of who's running the swamp in DC. The problem is we're $35 trillion in debt. So we are probably going to see a correction in equities next year. And if that in fact is the case and they were looking to double it, I'd probably tell them to take some big dogs in maybe 6 or 7 tech stocks, but buy long-term calls on them after they've corrected a bunch. Some will be down 50% in a major correction, right? If you had done this in 02, 07, maybe even arguably the latter part of 22 or the first quarter when COVID nailed in 2020, you'd have done really well because a lot of those positions were up over 100%. That means the options would have been up 4 or 5-fold over that same period of time.
What is the biggest obstacle that you have had to overcome in your business to build the success that you have today?
It really is throwing down the challenge for clients to act. That's been the biggest. It really has nothing to do with us. I mean, we could be the best thing since sliced bread, right? But if a client's not the right timing, look, I get it. We're here to help you. But we find many people will just stick their head in the sand. And if I really could get any message out, this be to get out and take action. It's like Atomic Habits, right? James Clear lays out some of the best detail I've ever come across of taking action. Teeny steps for the goals, right? Then the other one, Sahil Bloom, who, if you don't know who he is, very, very up and coming podcaster, Sahil Bloom, he has a whole segment out there on anti-goals. He uses going down that river rafting trip. You're trying to get to the sunset at the end of the rafting trip, but everybody's focused on getting to the end of the river. They're not focused on the 6 rocks that get hit. They could flip the boat over in the next turn. So if you focus on just anti-goals, this is real powerful in investing, by the way. If you focus on just anti-goals along the way, you have a much better shot at getting to that horizon.
Does Sahil have a book or just a podcast?
Sahil, he's such a fantastic story. So Sahil Bloom, you can look him up. He's a great guy. He was an NCAA massive baseball player that completely blew one of the biggest title games in NCAA history, and he never made it in the majors because of it.
Wow.
I'm going to leave it with that because everybody's going to be like, oh my God.
I'll make sure that the audience follows up with that. So as we wrap, Steve, tell the audience where they can connect with you the easiest.
Yeah, it's just Steve at firstdownfinancialinc.com. Would be the best thing to do. Send me an email. I'm ridiculously responsive and, as Jared knows, ridiculously organized. So we're back to them pretty quick.
Steve Vettorel, thank you so much for joining us on 0 to 100.
Thank you, Jared.
Awesome.
Appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to 0 to 100 podcast. We hope you feel inspired and ready to accelerate your business. Remember, your journey to success starts with a single step. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving for greatness. For more resources and show notes, visit jaredguyrandolph.com. We'll see you next time.